Hey, what's up guys? So today we're going to be talking about The Amazing Spider-Man number 21. This is it. This is the story arc we've been waiting for. This is the answer to all of our prayers. What happened to Spider-Man and MJ? Now, spoiler warning, I will be outright talking about the comic book itself. So if you haven't read it and you want to know what happens before you hear me talk about it, then probably do so right now. Otherwise, if you just want to follow along the story through my video, then you're also welcome to do so. But without further ado, let's begin. So the story begins in Peter Parker's thoughts once again. It is morning, and he's in bed, and he's thinking, you gotta love Saturday mornings. You can silence your alarm, roll over, and just, wait a minute. Oh no, yesterday. That means today is Friday. He gets up immediately and starts getting ready for the day. He showers and brushes his teeth at the same time, and he continues his thoughts. Come on, Peter, multitask. Norman's gonna off me. Not the first time he tried, but this time I'll deserve it, so that'll be new. He finishes getting ready with a minute to spare and he thinks to himself he's a genius. But he starts feeling around and there are no keys. He destroys his living room just looking for his keys and also spends 10 minutes looking for them, so he's 10 minutes late. Inevitably, he finds them in the little bowl where one typically would put keys in. It looked like he just might have put a newspaper over it, so obviously he wouldn't be able to see the keys. But he's thinking to himself, I did not put my keys here. Or maybe I did. Doesn't matter. Rushes out the door. It can't be this hard for other people to get out of the house. We cut over to how Mary Jane's morning is going, and she's telling her son to get moving, Buster. He yells no, and she's claiming, we're going to the park. But her son says, I hate the park. MJ responds with, you do not hate the park. And Stephanie, why aren't your shoes on? Her daughter that's just standing in the background zoning out. And she says, I'm thinking, do clowns have ears? In the midst of this chaos, Paul walks in. And MJ continues by saying, honey, put your shoes on. But Paul interrupts with, I got snacks. MJ questions him, did you remember the juice? And he goes, son of a guy. Their daughter is curious and looks at Paul and questions, what guy? And Paul just looks at her and says, put your shoes on, honey. Owen, their son, grabs Paul's bag of snacks and asks, can I have a snack? Paul says, at the park. But they grab the bag anyways and he says, oh, there they go. At the same time that Owen's grabbing like a snack from the bag, he's pulling his sister's hair for some reason. And the sister yells and says, ow, Owen's pulling my hair. And he feels the need to lie and says, no, I'm not. And MJ tells Owen, if you don't behave, you can't go to the park. Owen again claims, I hate the park. But MJ tries reminding him of yesterday and says, remember yesterday when you cried because I made you leave the park? And Owen claims, no. And Stephanie, their daughter, looks up at Paul and questions, Daddy, do clowns have ears? And Paul responds with, what? Why would they? MJ looks upward, super frustrated, and says to herself, we're never getting out of the house. So that's how MJ's morning is going. And we cut over to Peter Parker, who's walking down the sidewalk, thinking to himself, sunny day. Spring comes faster every year. At least it gives everyone something to talk about. And he's just noticing everyone around him that's just walking past him is just like recording and talking about whatever events are happening behind him. And inevitably Peter gives in to the curiosity of everyone around him and he says, and he thinks to himself, okay, I'll bite. What's everyone gawking at? And thinks to himself, oh no, only to reveal a tornado in the distance. We move over to MJ's family, who finally managed to get ready and they're outside of their building. She claims, wow, it's cold. And Paul responds with, my phone said high 70s. And MJ questions, then why is it snowing? They both look up and MJ questions, Paul? And he responds with, I see it. It's him. MJ says, it can't be. Are you sure? And their kids start freaking out and they start questioning, Mommy? And it's the same tornado that Peter sees in the distance. But the tornado is far closer to MJ than it is to Peter. MJ notices there's a figure within the tornado getting close to her. And she starts thinking to herself, I'm scared. The Scribble man is back. MJ continues looking at the tornado while also resting her right hand on Paul's shoulder. And she claims opposite directions. Basically meaning get the fuck out of here with the kids. Paul grabs the kids and says, let's go kids. But Stephanie questions, what about mommy? Paul doesn't respond and says, let's go. He starts walking away with the kids and looks back at MJ and questions, remember how this works? I'll find you when they're safe. And MJ responds without looking back at him and says, I remember. Peter and MJ quickly get on the phone with each other at this moment, and once their line connects, Peter questions, MJ? And she responds with, Peter, do you see it? And he says, I think so. What's... She cuts him off and says, he's back. Do you hear me, Peter? It's him. He came back. As I, personally, the reader, flipped the page at this moment, we get encountered by a double-page splash of just text saying 1 year earlier. We cut to the events of 1 year earlier, and we're inside Rikers Island. I believe just outside of New York. It's basically just a prison for superhuman in this Marvel universe. And there's like a SWAT defense-looking team just outside of this prisoner's cage. And one of the SWAT members questions, what did you do to the door, Raven? And another one goes, you had a lot of privileges, and now they're gone, man. I'm taking them all away. Do you hear me? No more computer, no more paper. Let's see how you do your little equations now. But Raven, who's standing inside of his cell, who somehow managed to lock the door with a lot of steel bars, he's standing there talking to the guards and says, that's okay. I got it all worked out. Looks like there's multiple prisoners that he just offed on the ground around him. But there's one that's kept alive, and he's looking at him. He's super scared. Raven turns over and looks at him and says, Kahul Ajal, discipline. And the scared prisoner copies what he says and says the same exact thing. Raven continues, my equations are sound. Way up awaits me in Zimbalba, hungry for sacrifice. Only a road of blood may lead me there. Are you ready? And the scared prisoner responds, I am ready, Kahul Ajal. Raven approaches him with the scythe that he's holding and says, I will sing your name to the gods of death. And immediately uses the scythe to slash his stomach. And the prisoner's just screaming with agony. And at this very moment, there's random voices that are coming out, but you can't tell who is saying it. They're just there. One voice says, when are you not a mess? Another says, hey, there was that one time. And then another's laughter followed by, okay, you've got me. Another one saying, yeah, let's do it. And a final one questioning, MJ? And that's when Raven's eyes start glowing red. We're still 1 year ago, but we skip over to what Peter Parker and MJ are doing. And they're inside of MJ's apartment. MJ looks out the window and she's noticing a glow. And Peter questions, what are you looking at? And turns over and sees for himself, only to reveal that it's Raven, who's just glowing outside of their window and just floating there. And he's saying to himself, a road of blood led to you. Come with me. And we get a little asterisk by the writer saying, remember this happening in ASM number 894? So I suppose these events happened in that comic book itself. Maybe in more detail. Maybe it's a little retconned in this. Who knows? I'm not gonna go out of my way to read that issue just to see a possibility of a retcon and be kind of disappointed that they're not being continuous with the story. Or maybe they are. Like I said, I'm not gonna go back and read that comic anytime soon. There's too many things to read, and that's not high on my priority list. But anyways, after Raven prompts them to come with him, Peter says, you're gonna have to ask a lot nicer than that. Raven speaks a random language of his own and opens a hole through her apartment wall. And Peter instantly tells MJ to get back and questions how the hell he did this. But Raven floats into the apartment building and questions, do you remember me? And Peter says, I think you have me mistaken for someone else. But Raven says, no, the road of blood led to you. Are you the sun-blooded clown priest? He asks Peter. Raven's eyes are glowing red, and he says, your death will bring about the end of things. It will make way for the final sacrifice. But Peter, without thinking, he likes to act quick, and he immediately lounges at this guy who's just standing in the middle of MJ's apartment and says, pass. Peter doesn't really stop and think about the scenario before he acts upon them. Like, of course, he storms directly at Raven, who's just standing there, and upon reaching him, Raven just uses some magic blast of his own and throws Peter up against the wall, sending him flying through it with so much force. And as that's happening, MJ's worried about Peter and yells his name. MJ gets really mad at this, turns over at Raven, and yells, get the fuck out of my apartment, dog. Raven responds with, "The sun blood banished me with violence. So with violence, I say hello," as he approaches MJ. MJ questions, "What do you want?" Raven gets near MJ and grabs her by the wrist and says, "To do math. Ancient bloody math." She's yelling in pain and says, "What are you doing? I can see. I see." And I'm assuming she gets some sort of future vision passed onto her by Raven, possibly? I'm not too sure, but it looks like MJ is just overall seeing what Raven's whole plan is. Possibly. But after she says, "I see," she continues, "I see you flooding the world with blood." And Raven responds with, "Then you see very well indeed." But their little moment gets interrupted by debris that gets forcefully thrown at Raven, causing him to let go of MJ. And you see Peter off frame say, "Get your hands off of her," as he tosses Raven out of the apartment. He climbs over MJ to protect her, and at the same time questions, "There's still a spare suit in your bottom drawer?" And she responds with, "Oh yeah." And I thought this part was kind of funny, because it tells a little story over their relationship, and how MJ sort of always expects Peter to come back, at the very least, into her apartment in some shape or another, because it looks like she just has a suit ready for him in case the scenario arises, which it looked like it arose right there. And I thought that was a fun little world building little detail. We skip over to Raven, who's just falling out of the apartment building, and he's just laughing to himself. Right before he hits the ground, he says a few of his magical words that only he understands, and some force comes out of his back, slowing down his fall, basically preventing hardcore damage to himself. And he starts getting up after the fall. As he's getting up, he hears a voice out of frame saying, "Oh, thank God you're okay." And it's Spider-Man swinging into frame, and Spider-Man says, "I was really worried." Raven sees Spider-Man and says, "You've adorned yourself in the gown of your heresy. Fate prepares you for your sacrifice. May mighty Wayab see you and cleave your heart." Spider-Man's not tolerating this, and he just whips his mouth and says, "Shh," and lands on top of his abdomen. Spider-Man starts punching Raven on the ground and says, "I don't know who you are, but you did a lot of damage to that nice lady's apartment right when her boyfriend was gonna move in." Raven tries getting out of it, but Spider-Man continues and says, "No, you don't. I'm not done talking," and grabs Raven's hands to prevent him from escaping. Or was he escaping? Basically preventing from doing something. Spider-Man needs to finish talking, and he says, "You'll have your chance to respond as soon as I've made my point." He slams him into the ground and questions, "Well, have I?" Spider-Man takes the webbing off of his mouth and allows him to speak, and Raven continues by saying, "Yes, please, I'm done fighting." Spider-Man kinda lets down his guard, and with his hands now free, he places them on Spider-Man's chest. And it looks like we seal Spider-Man in some sort of fate. Spider-Man starts saying his name, Raven. Raven hears this and responds, "Yes? You banished my deity, stole my chance to be its emissary, to wield its power, but we will try again." Spider-Man's wondering, "What?" But Raven continues and says, "I've marked you for vengeance, and marked another for sacrifice. And if Wayup finds me worthy, I will claim the title of the emissary." So my understanding is that this battle, he managed, of course, to stop Raven in his plans, but he basically just postponed it for a future attempt, basically sealing away Spider-Man and MJ's fate to him. During this moment with Raven, at the same time, MJ's inside of a police station, and the policeman says, "The police are on their way, Miss Watson." But MJ's distracted. She notices something on her wrist pop up and says, "Didn't notice that." The cop that's trying to talk to her keeps trying to get her attention, but the thing that popped up on her wrist just glows immensely. Spider-Man and MJ at that very moment then get transported to just a different environment. I don't want to say a different dimension because I honestly don't know what it is. It's just a completely different environment. It looks like definitely a city. I don't want to say it's New York because it's not confirmed. It just looks like a city. It's destroyed. There's a giant looking looking serpent on top of one of the buildings, but I don't know if it's alive or if it's just part of the environment. Like I said, there's not much about it. It just looks like a very destroyed city. The clouds are red. It looks very apocalyptic. And MJ's asking Peter, Peter, where are we? And to be continued. That's how that story ends. So, what do I think about the comic book itself? I could honestly say it was pretty good. Now, yeah, that may be pretty good praise, but honestly, I haven't really given, like, a fuck about this comic since probably issue 14. I keep bringing up issue 14, and then before that, it was literally issue 1 through 5. The story that they had ready before they relaunched the series. So it's been a pretty decent change of pace to actually get a story that hooks me, if that makes sense. There have been so many that have not hooked me during this run. So we'll see where they go with this. We get to see more of the family dynamic with MJ and her kids and Paul. Although I really do not like their kid Owen. He is a complete asshole. Like, is this kid gonna be the villain of this story arc? For real? They do not, like, discipline this kid whatsoever. We still don't know why she has these kids and married to Paul, but like it's been heavily advertised, we're promised that we're gonna find out within the next, I believe, 5 issues or something like that. So we'll see where that goes. I also liked how they introduced the Scribble Man. This is the first time I'm reading about him, and I really like his character. He seems very intimidating. Like, all he does is literally just stand there, and dude, you don't want to be in that room with him just standing there. That's how cool he comes off to me. And the moment he gets introduced, there's a huge moment of urgency that just gets built up. Especially with how hardcore MJ panics over the phone with Peter. Like, you can tell she's immensely terrified. And we're gonna find out why. So this is gonna be pretty cool. And I'm not gonna spend too much time on it, but holy hell, dude. I am not a huge fan of those 2-page splashes that are literally just telling me 1 year earlier. Huh? But anyways, yeah, I'm not a fan of those. As I was saying about Raven though, I like him as a villain. He only has one goal. It looks like he's just trying to achieve the title of emissary for this, like, god that he worships. Who knows whatever the title of emissary grants you, but that's this guy's goal. And it's not quite clear how MJ and Peter get targeted for this guy's goal. My interpretation of it is just that they were randomly picked. And the moment they were picked, that's when he just appeared outside of MJ's apartment building. As I mentioned earlier, Peter does not think things through. And like, isn't this motherfucker supposed to be like smart? He immediately charges to attack Raven, and I suppose that's just for plot reasons, so he's able to get put aside for just a brief moment while Raven walks up to MJ and seals her fate for this guy's sacrifice. After Peter being stupid though, I really liked the artwork for the beatdown that Spider-Man gives Raven outside on the street. It looks pretty cool. And they're doing a similar premise where they just transport Spider-Man into, like I said, I don't know if it's a different dimension, but just a completely different environment. And it feels a little bit copy and paste exactly what happened in the past with Chasm and Spider-Man, where some dumb way he tricked him into going into limbo. But I like the way Spider-Man's fate was sealed in this moment, because it was basically a kind of realistic moment where he drops down his guard, and of course the villain takes the opportunity to hold on to Spider-Man's boobies and mark him for vengeance, while also at the same time, and then causing both Spider-Man and MJ, of course, to be sent off to that random environment that we don't know of yet. But like I said, I thoroughly did enjoy this story. It actually hooked me, and it kind of left me looking forward to what's gonna happen next. And all these questions that have been asked since like the first issue and really haven't been touched upon ever since. Should we have high hopes that these questions would get answered in a satisfying manner? Well, we're just gonna have to wait and find out. I'm not really holding out my breath for these answers, but I kind of sorta am, since they managed to hook me. I know this writer can write, because the first 5 issues of this run were pretty good. After that, somehow they sort of went off and just kind of stopped telling that story. But we'll see how it continues. It only took 20 issues to continue answering and building on those questions and giving us some answers. Dog. But anyways, I appreciate you guys for listening to me talk about this comic book. And if you guys want to hear me talk about the rest of the ongoing issues, then make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.